Welcome to 2023 and the latest episode of Lean In Leander. So 2022 is behind us, and while there are a lot of changes for the community at large, I was not able to necessarily report on a number of them. So that's something I'm hoping to solve for in 2023 and get an opportunity to bring you some more content on a more regular basis. I'm trying to make the commitment myself to produce this on at least the monthly basis. And with that in mind, I'm always looking for ideas and things to talk about with other people. I have my ideas, of course, but I'm always open to suggestions. And one of my friends, Jennifer Austin, who I work with on the Leander Economic Development Committee, she made the suggestion that in light of the tax bills, it would maybe be appropriate time to kind of educate the citizens as to what the tax process is and what the responsibility of the tax assessor's office is in regard to that. So I had the good fortune to be able to sit down with Larry Gaddes, who is the Williamson County Tax Assessor Collector, to have a little bit of a chat. And it was very interesting. I think I learned quite a bit from the conversation, a few things that I maybe hadn't considered before. And I wanted to share that with you here. So, there's some quotes that lend themselves to interpretation, but there is the death and taxes idiom that's pretty straightforward. So certain things in life are unavoidable, including dying and having to pay taxes. And so on the latter part of that, we're going to sit down and chat with Larry here. So with no further ado, here's my conversation with Larry Gaddes. All right, and we are here with Larry Gaddes, who has very generously given me some of his time today. Larry, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. Greatly appreciate it.
So I've had some opportunity to have some general conversations with assessors and appraisers and, kind of going back and forth on how all this stuff works. And I know that generally speaking, like Joe Public gets confused on appraisal and assessment. So let's start there. Let's start with, give us a quick little synopsis of what the differences between the two offices.
Sure. So in Texas, you have an appraisal district, which is a governmental entity that's their main job is to determine the value of property within the county. So we have a Williamson Central Appraisal District, and they determine the value of property in the county. And my office, the County Tax Assessor Collector's Office, takes the information from the appraisal district and takes concerning your property value, takes the tax rates from all the taxing units in Williamson County, and there's about 130 of them, takes all the tax rates from the taxing units in the county, does the math. That's the assessor part of my job. We do the math to calculate how much your tax bill is, and then in October timeframe, we mail a tax bill and begin collecting the money for the taxing units that tax your property.
So when you're going through that process, I mean, obviously the intent or the direction is to ensure that the properties are taxed fairly and consistently. I think that's probably a fair way to say that, right?
That they're valued. The
Okay.
Fair and consistent, fair and equal is placed on the value part of a property, yes, and of course tax accurately, I think would be a primary focus for us, for my office. But yes, accurately assessed, meaning we've gotten all the right information on your property and have calculated that tax bill correctly.
So you mentioned like 130 different entities or taxing entities that you have to deal with. Typically, a typical homeowner, how many of the 130 really apply to them?
So depending on where you live in the county, you can have anywhere between 4 taxing units at a minimum and as many as 7 or 8. Typically, if you're living in the city, you're probably have about 6 taxing units that tax your property.
And what would those typically be? Like what's that list?
So you've got the county. Always, that's every property in the county has the county taxing. You've got a county road and bridge tax that the county also levies, but there's basically 2 separate tax rates for that. In the Leander area, you've got the city of Leander. You've got Upper Brushy Creek Water Control and Improvement District, which covers mostly the southern half of Williamson County. So that's 4. You've got ACC, the junior college, Austin Community College, and you have Leander ISD, or a school district. School districts cover every property in the entire state. So no matter where you live, you're going to have a county tax and a school tax. And then the other ones are kind of optional. You may or may not live in the city. You might live in a MUD or municipal utility district, or a junior college district. So after you get through this county and the school district, then the other ones start layering on depending on where you live in the state.
I got you. So I know that, and we've talked about this previously on the podcast, that like the LISD that's the big one. That's a big chunk. I want to say like 50% of the tax that you pay on your home is pretty much the school district. Is that
Yes.
fair? Okay.
50 to 60%. It could be more. Yep.
Okay. So just for clarity, as far as the tax and your job,
Mm-hmm.
there's no influence there, right? Like you're just dealing with what you're dealt. You're not saying, well, that's too much or that's too little.
Yeah. No. I get the value from the appraisal districts, the tax rate from the taxing units, and I do the math on what I tell people is I just do math. I take value times tax rate. There's an equal sign there with a big number on the other side of it. That number happens to have a dollar sign in front of it, right? That's the money that I collect. And I don't get to keep any of that money either. I have to turn around and give it to the county commissioners and the city council and the school board for them to spend in according to their budgets that they've adopted.
So, and is that just again, just from an operational perspective, that's a one-time effort? Like you do that once a year? Is that ongoing throughout the year? How's it typically work?
It's so the taxing units adopt their tax rates. Also, let me start back at the before. We get the values from the appraisal district near the end of July. So around that time, the appraisal district hands over files to my office to say, here's all the properties in Williamson County, and here's the value for every single one of those properties. And there's about 250,000 accounts in Williamson County. So here's the value for that. We then wait about a month to 2 months, and in the August and September timeframe, your taxing units are adopting their budgets and then adopting the tax rate that they need to multiply against the value to generate the revenue that they need to fund their budget. So value comes first. The appraisal, and at the time I'm getting those values, the taxing units, the city and the schools, they're getting that value that, Leander ISD, you have $50 billion of value in your district to tax. And then they determine what tax rate they want or need to generate the revenue that they need to fund their budget. So that happens in August and September. Hopefully around the middle of October, we have done our job and processed all of that data to create a tax bill that then gets mailed out to property owners.
So, okay, I get that. I get my tax bill. One of my favorite songs is on the Revolver album. It was just recently redone by the Beatles.
Yeah.
I know you're familiar with the song. I would say, is it on your best of list or like I dread to hear list?
Everybody points at me when the song comes on, and I just kind of grin and chuckle. And when I'm at church and the pastor points out that the Zacchaeus or Matthew was also a tax collector, and that they were the most hated people in all of the kingdom back in the days of the Bible, then I get a chuckle out of that too. But Taxman is it's not a bad song.
Actually,
It's
it's a very well constructed song. So I love the song. The
yeah,
topic is just it's ironic in our conversation. That's the only reason I
yeah.
bring it up. So okay, so I get the bill. I don't like it. I'm not happy with it. I don't like what it's telling. How can I appeal that? What is it? What is it me as a property owner can do at that point?
So what we say, if you come into my office in October, November, December, January, which is the time frame that you have to pay that bill, and you say, I don't like it, this is too high, we have to say, unfortunately, the remedies you have available to you have expired. You do not, once it gets to a tax bill, the two things that need to occur and your ability to protest or challenge those two things have already transpired, and the deadline is passed. So you have the ability to protest your value at the appraisal district, and the deadline for that is typically May 15th. So you'll get a notice around the beginning of April each year that says, from the appraisal district, that says, here's what we think the value of your property is. You have about 30 days or until May 15th to file a protest at the appraisal district to say, and then bring them evidence to show why your value should be lower. And you can go through that process. Then when each of those 130 taxing units are determining what their tax rate needs to be, they are having public hearings that invite the public to come and say, tell us what you think about our budget that we are adopting, and then tell us what you think, another public hearing to say, tell us what you think about the tax rate that we are adopting in order to fund that budget. I will say recently there have been about, I think the appraisal district would tell you there's anywhere between 65 to 70,000 protests filed each year. Especially recently with the increase in values. Again, that's about 70,000 out of 250,000 properties. 70,000 people challenge the value that the appraisal district has determined. Almost no one goes to the public hearings for schools and cities in the county when they are adopting their budget and their tax rate. And it's extremely rare when anybody stands up to the podium at a public hearing to say, you're spending too much money, and here are the things I want to do without in order for you to lower the budget. So please lower your budget so that you can then lower your tax rate and not take as much money away from me as what you are doing now. So that's a big component that I think, Andrew, that if I would talk to people individually, and I do all the time, I say a lot of people challenge their value. And there's two guys that show up to the county commissioners meetings each year. It's the same two guys over and over again. Out of 650,000 residents in Williamson County, two people stand up at that podium during the public hearing and say, my taxes are too high. I want you to lower my tax bill and lower your tax rate and lower your budget so that you can take less of my money. And in my opinion, that's way too few people making those statements if they are not happy with their tax bill.
Yeah, no, I would completely 100% agree. I mean, we talk about this a lot in the podcast when we're talking about Leander specific issues,
Right.
is just I qualified as apathy. But to your point, I think a lot of people don't really understand the mechanism. So it's a little
Right.
unfair to just say you're being apathetic. I think people don't understand. Like again, and that was set up, so I appreciate you answering the way that you did.
Sure.
If you get the bill, it's too late. You've already had your opportunity to change what that bill would be. So educate yourself as to how that works.
Right. And I would say the reason that so many people go to the appraisal district with their value is they get the chief appraiser will tell you he sends out a personal invitation every year to every property owner that says, please come and tell me what is wrong with this value when they send that notice of appraised value in April. So a person gets a delivery of that invitation every year in their mailbox. And then you get an invitation from me to complain by getting that tax bill with my name on it. You know exactly where you can go to complain. What's difficult is you don't get that notice in the mail every time a taxing unit's adopting a tax rate. It's posted in the newspaper, and it's posted on their websites and things like that. But you don't get a personal invitation in your mailbox to say, come and tell us what you don't like about our budget or our tax rate. And if you live in the city of Leander, you would be getting 6 of those, and you've got 6 different places to go and complain about your taxes or your tax rate. And that's a lot of work for somebody that has to go to work every day. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of time out of their personal schedule, and it's difficult, and it's really, quite frankly, it's a pain. And a lot of people don't have the time to be able to do that or the energy to do that type of work. So that's why that component is missing. But you can always pick up the phone, send an email to your representative for each of your taxing units and let them know, that's easy enough to send an email instead of going to those public hearings. And I would encourage everybody to do that.
So from your perspective, again, since you're mentioning that and you're encouraging people to get involved, and obviously that's what we always want to try to do that. That's one of the things that, from the podcast, one of the premises of the podcast is to surface these types of conversations, because it's not something that you necessarily pick up. The Bills versus the Bengals has a lot more a lot more pull than this conversation per se. But I think it's really important that we at least let people know, hey, this is how it works.
Absolutely.
And you have a choice. You can make a choice to get involved and to take that time, or find a way to be able to maybe involve yourself with organizations that do that type of thing, that do
Absolutely.
have those conversations and reach out for, I don't know of any right offhand. Are there organizations that people can collectively be part of to help with that process?
There are taxpayer organizations that lobby the legislature on taxpayer issues, but there's nobody that's going to go to a city council meeting on your behalf. It's going to be an individual that is standing up for what they feel is for their rights and for what they feel is important, either to their city council or their school board or their county commissioners, at a local level, that it would be extremely rare. You may get a group of people that where an individual has rallied a group of people to go before and speak on a particular subject, but usually it's on individual items that come up throughout the year. Rarely is it on the budget or the tax rate. Mm-hmm. And while we're on this subject too, I would say, and I think wrongly so, the Texas legislature has put a lot of emphasis on the tax rate adoption process. And you have to blast out a lot of information to the public about the tax rate hearing and the notices that have to be published and put on the websites and stuff. However, in my humble opinion, the tax rate matters much less than the budget does. Mm-hmm. And again, one of my pocket phrases is, if they don't spend the money, they don't need to take your money. So, and the budget is the document that spends your tax dollars. So, and they start the budget, the county starts the budget process. We've already started that for a budget that they're going to adopt in August. And the cities and the schools are the exact same way. They're determining what their budget's going to be now for next year. And they have one meeting where they say, public, come and tell us what you think about this budget. for the most part, that budget's pretty much been determined. They may tweak a few little things here, but the vast majority of that budget has been determined. And once that budget's determined, that kind of locks in. If we're spending this much money, here's the tax rate we need to generate the revenue of the money that we plan on spending. So I would really encourage the general public, focus your conversations on the budget. And if you're going to stand up at that podium, be willing to tell the school board or the county commissioners or the ACC or City of Leander City Council, here's what I'm willing to do without, so that you can cut that out of your budget and lower your tax rate and lower my tax bill. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's going to take. What services are you willing to have cut in order to pay less taxes?
Well, and then in Leander, I know just from my experience and from my conversations and involvement in the city, it's kind of the other side of that as well, because there is a limitation on the budget in the city of Leander, in that the 2% that is collected, 1% goes to Cap Metro for the transportation costs. And then so the city is forced to work with just 1% and work that 1% to figure out what the budgets need to be, while there are the realities of, the infrastructure needs, and, now the water needs are becoming much more pronounced, and just the general growth in the city of Leander creates all these stressors on that budget process, while at the same time the political realities are nobody wants to pay any taxes, so we want to see our property taxes lowered.
Right.
And then honestly, you drive around and you complain about the potholes and the lack of curbs and things of that nature. Well, you can't do one without the other, and so there has to be at some point a consensus of that, like, this is reasonable.
And I think that's where, to that point, I rarely hear anybody step up to that podium. And I attend a lot of meetings for different entities, mainly the county, but I've been to a lot of school board meetings, a lot of city council meetings. Rarely have I ever heard anybody say, stop providing this service to me. Right. It's always, I want more. We need more. I want better. And those things come with a cost, unfortunately.
No, and then of course there's always, the calculus includes any bonds or anything else that you've done previously, and now you're still paying.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's a much more complex conversation than I think most people are either aware of and or willing to have.
Yeah, it is complicated. It's a lot to absorb. And then you take that, and it's, you've experienced, I think, probably on the city level. Now take that times 6 and do that with 6 different entities. And all of those other entities are much larger and much more complicated. ACC covers 5 counties in Central Texas. Mm-hmm. Leander ISD, one of the largest school districts in Williamson County. Much larger, more complicated budgets than just the city. So yeah, it's exponentially more difficult. Absolutely.
So from your perspective in just kind of managing that thing, you're Williamson County. Williamson County is a pretty big county at the end of the day. How complicated is that? How is it something that, again, I work in the technology sector. I work with data analysis and things of that nature. Typically, I'm kind of in the numbers myself. Sure. How much do things change year over year? What's the challenges in the job itself?
Not a whole lot of challenges from us in that perspective. The people that are running those different governmental entities, that's a big challenge for them. For me, it's just, I figure out how much money I need to collect from property owners and hand that over to the school districts and folks. And those are the ones that are managing that. I don't get to see their budgets. I don't know what their budgets look like. And I don't thankfully have to deal with the county budget. I'm focused on my budget for my office and making sure that I have the tools that I need to do my job well and calculate, accurate tax bills and things like that. So, but from the general public, from a John Q property owner's perspective, I would say it sounds difficult, it sounds complicated, but identifying again where you think your representative, and remember, each one of these taxing entities that I talked about, City of Leander, Leander ISD, ACC, Upper Brushy Creek, WCID, the county, they all have elected members that you, the taxpayer, have elected to represent you in managing that taxing unit. And it's as simple as picking up the phone or sending an email about what you would like to see done. And I'll tell you a quick story. Back in, I think it was probably 2015, 2016, I decided, what would it take for my tax bill to go down? And I looked, the first place I looked really was the school district. Every one of these tax units has their budget published on their website, by the way. So you can pull that and see where are they spending the money, and what do I think it needs, where do I think it needs to be cut so I can have a lower tax bill. I pulled up Round Rock ISD's budget. They spend about, and again, remember, this was at least 6-7 years ago. They spend $8 million on athletics. That I'm certain that did not include coaches' salaries. That probably just encompassed uniforms and equipment and things like that for Round Rock ISD. So no coach salary, doesn't turn the lights on the football stadiums or anything like that, in my opinion. And there was not this amount of detail available to me, but what I saw was a budget that probably just bought uniforms and equipment and things like that. $8 million. If you eliminated the athletics budget from Round Rock ISD completely, it would have saved me about $9 a month on my tax bill. So think about no football on a Friday night in Texas, and that saves you $9 a month on your tax bill. Are people going to be willing to give up $9 a month, or are they willing to spend $9 a month to have their kids in sports in their school district? You can eliminate the sheriff's department for Williamson County, and it's going to save you about $20 a month on your tax bill. You can eliminate 911 communications for the county. That'll be about another $20 per month on your tax bill. So the things that we're talking about eliminating to lower a tax bill, pretty significant. Those are the things that people really need to, those are the kind of weeds that people need to get into to figure this out. Or maybe it lets them have an appreciation for the dollars that they do spend on their tax bill and for the services that they're getting. I don't know. It could go either way.
Yes.
But there's some work involved.
No, and I think the way you just framed that, love the Friday Night Lights reference there, because it's funny when we have those conversations. I no longer have children in the school district, but I'm still paying taxes. Right. So, the $9 that I'm paying on a monthly basis for your kids to go to a football game on a Friday night, in my opinion, speaking strictly for myself,
sure,
as a community member, as someone who lives in a community, if I didn't want to do that, I need to move somewhere where I don't have that type of overarching responsibility to my community at large.
Sure.
As members of a greater community, whether that be Leander, whether that be Austin or Cedar Park or Williamson County or the state of Texas or the United States as a whole, that's part of the deal, right? Like, we do that so that we have these things. And I think a lot of the disconnect occurs. And I'm really glad the way you framed it, because in my opinion, again, speaking strictly for myself, people don't see that. They don't look at it that way. They get the bill. And that's where that shock, that like, oh, this is a lot of money.
And that's a very common question for us. Sun City in Georgetown is the largest retirement community in the state of Texas. So we have a lot of folks that say, I've never had kids in a Texas school because I moved here from out of state, and now I'm 70 years old. Why am I paying school taxes? I can't answer that question because the Texas legislature has decided that you need to pay school taxes, but I have a feeling it's because we all benefit from an educated society. So you're paying school taxes so that other people's kids can grow up to be engineers and build roads and sanitation, water and wastewater facilities, and be doctors and nurses to take care of us when we get older, and to do all those things. So there's that component of, there is a big picture here that a lot of people focus very narrowly down on their tax bill as individuals, but there is a big picture that it typically doesn't get talked about.
Yeah, I think in this case, this is where WIFM really doesn't apply. What's in it for me? Yeah, if you want to look at
Right.
it that way, but it's not. That's not about you. It's about the collective. It's what we do. Again, as a society, as a
Right.
community, to ensure that these things get done, stay done. I always, it's an investment. It's an investment in your future, and to your point, it's an investment in our community's future and the ability for us to, have those doctors and engineers and things of that in the future. I think it's a great way to frame it.
And you can move to places. I mentioned earlier at the very beginning, there are places you can live in Texas where you may only have 3 or 4 taxing units, and you can live in Thrall or Copeland area of the county and have a really low tax rate. And speaking of, I jotted down a couple of numbers before I got on, and the overall tax rate in City of Leander is about $2.20 per $100 of value, 2.2%. So on a $500,000 home with no exemptions or anything, that's an $11,000 tax bill. So you can move to a place where you don't, you've got well water and septic, and the roads. You may be living on a dirt road, on a county road out in the middle of Thrall, or Copeland or Granger. You're paying a lot less taxes, but it will be reflected in the services that you have. A 911 call may take a little bit longer to get an ambulance or a sheriff's department out to your property. So you got $2.20 for City of Leander. If you live in Cedar Park, specifically in the city of Cedar Park, you've got about $2.15 is your tax rate, your total tax rate. City of Round Rock is about $1.90. And if you live in City of Austin, which is, all of these are surrounding City of Leander, you live in the City of Austin, for instance, the Avery Ranch neighborhood, your tax rate's about $2.27. So just picking where you live can fluctuate your tax rate pretty significantly, and ergo your tax bill.
Interesting. Again, I'm glad that we're able to kind of frame it in the way that we're framing it, because I think it helps people understand specifically what some of those issues are, and what the reality is of what the actual
Sure.
cost is. So.
Yes.
I appreciate the time, Larry. We're just about out of time here. So is there a website or anything like that you'd like to let people know where they can maybe find answers to other questions?
Our website, wilco.org/tax office, has a lot of information concerning property taxes. I want to give a shout out to our appraisal district, Williamson Central Appraisal District. It's WCAD.org. Again, WCAD.org. They've got a ton of information. They were the first appraisal district in the state to publish basically how-to videos on their website, and then many other appraisal districts followed suit, but they've got great videos about how your property is appraised, how to protest the value of your property, and a bunch of other things. Also, I want to tell your listeners that the appraisal district builds your property tax account. So any changes that need to happen to your account, for instance, if you need to change your mailing address, or the ownership changes, or you need to add your homestead exemption, or you're turning over 65 this year, you need to add your over 65 or disabled persons or disabled veterans exemption. So the videos on the appraisal district's website at WCAD.org. If you go to that website, again, that's for the Williamson Central Appraisal District, WCAD.org. They've got videos that have great information about that will tell a property owner how their house is measured and how the characteristics are determined, which will lead to how the appraisal district will determine the value of your property. They've got videos that take you through all the steps of how to protest the value of your property and what you'll experience when you go to the appraisal district during if you go through the protest process. So I would direct folks to our appraisal district's website, wcad.org. I've got information on our website as well. But if you need things like adding the homestead exemption, changing your mailing address, the appraisal district builds a property account. So any changes that need to be made to that property account has to be done. It starts with the appraisal district with ownership changes, adding or removing exemptions, changing mailing addresses, things like that, all go to the appraisal district. So you would reach out to them to make changes to your appraisal district, to your property.
And again, you want to do that at the first part of the year, because when you're hearing from Larry Gaddes, it's too late, right?
It's too late, right? Exactly. That it is too late to change your value. It's too late to have any say in the tax rate that was adopted by your taxing units. By the time that tax bill comes out, it's too late. There are instances, Andrew, where you can, if you forgot to file for your homestead exemption, they can go back a year or two and add it, and your property will get updated. But for things like the value and the tax rate, if you're coming to my office with a tax bill in your hand, the deadlines have passed to have any influence over those particular pieces of data.
Awesome. Well, Larry, I appreciate your time. Thank you so very, very much. This has been, I hope, informative to the audience. I've learned a couple of things, and I really appreciate the way that you frame things, because I think it's helpful for people to think about that from that perspective. It's very difficult as a taxpayer to really understand, again, because the football example, I don't have kids in school anymore. I'm not going to games
Right.
on Friday. I don't get the benefit of that tax.
And I think that's why people get so upset and frustrated, is they know so little about the things that have an impact on their tax bill. And that really does cause the anger around, trust me, there is anger around property taxes. But from my perspective, the more you know, the more you can understand and hopefully know how your money is being spent in your community, and maybe not feel better about it, but you at least understand it, and you're not out there with the pitchforks and torches chasing around Frankenstein.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, just we touched on it during the podcast. It's those elected officials. It's the people that are running to represent you. This is where you need to be asking those questions. I mean, that's
Right.
where you really need to bring that up. You know, what is their take on this? How well do they understand the complexities of these taxing entities? Because at the end of the day, that really is a big component of that job. I mean, how they manage that one particular issue.
That's one of the few things that they are absolutely required to do, is adopt a budget and adopt a tax rate, and then all the other stuff that get done. That if you look at the Texas Constitution and local government code and education code, that is one of the primary responsibilities of these governing bodies for the cities and the schools and the counties and stuff. So yeah, they need to understand it and know. And I will say, we've got great elected officials running our local the governing bodies here in Central Texas, and in Williamson County. I know a lot of them, and they are really good people, and they want to do good. But when they don't hear from taxpayers, then they have to assume that what they're doing is on the right path, and they're going to continue doing that. Whether it's spending money on parks or new schools or roads and things like that, they need to hear from their constituents, and ultimately that is the taxpayer. So I really do encourage folks to have those conversations with those people.
Yeah, and I'm going to dovetail on that because I'm one of those folks who does get involved and does try to, I'm on committees, I speak to my elected officials, things of that nature. I'm a very small percentage of the people who live in
Very,
my area,
very
very
small.
small percentage. So, to that point, I want to encourage the listeners and the watchers here on Lean and Leander, get involved. Get involved. Ask questions. Reach out. You can reach out to me here at Lean and Leander, and I'm happy to help you find who you might be looking for if that's the case. But I think you make that's probably the one thing I'll take out of this conversation today is that you've really, in my opinion, shone a light on that one piece because that is super, super important.
Yes,
And contextually, we don't talk about it that way. We really don't discuss it that way.
we do not. And if your listeners forward any questions to you, or if we need to have a follow up to answer a whole bunch of questions that this conversation has spurred, I'd be more than happy to do this again. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, I appreciate the time, Larry. Thank you so very, very much. Happy New Year.
Same to you.
All right. And
Thank
yeah, if there's a follow up necessary, I certainly will be reaching out. I do appreciate the opportunity to have talked to you.
Fantastic.
All right.
Great. Thank you for having me. Thank you,
Thanks
Andy.
so much. I appreciate it.